If you have up to $10,000 in cash that you don't want to invest in the stock market, and if you know you won't need it for about a year, here's the no-brainer of all no-brainers. Buy U.S. Series I savings bonds and get the safest 7% yield in the world. Yep, I said 7% yield and safest in the same sentence. The U.S. Treasury Department might have its problems, but it will never default on these obligations. The annual interest rate is actually a delicious 7.12% for an I bond bought right now. My wife and I have already bought $30,000 worth of these bad boys, and we'll be buying another 10 grand worth soon. But wait, aren't savings bonds like so 1940s to 1980s? Well, I did get a bunch of bonds as birthday, bar mitzvah, and graduation gifts way back when. But today's I-bonds are a different breed, and they're a great place to park cash, or even a way to create a nest egg that you're guaranteed will be there decades from now. Hi everybody, Mike Nadell here for the Dividends and Income channel. Before I talk more about this ultimate sure thing of an income investment, please do us a favor to help us keep growing, okay? Hit the thumbs up at the bottom of the video, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you get notifications of new videos as we publish them. Alright, let's talk about I-bonds, and let's start with what the I stands for. Of course, the I is for inflation. Probably the most used word in economic circles today. Introduced by the Treasury Department in 1998, I-bonds combine a guaranteed fixed interest rate that remains the same for the 30-year life of the bond and an inflation-adjusted rate that's set every 6 months on May 1st and November 1st of each year. This variable rate moves up and down with the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers, also called the CPI-U, so a bondholder is essentially protected from inflation. As prices rise on food, clothing, cars, utilities, and the like, so do I-bond interest rates. Currently, the fixed rate is 0%, and the semi-annual variable rate is 3.56%, which is doubled to reach the 7.12% figure. Whatever the given rate is for a 6-month period, you get that rate for the full 6 months, regardless of when you buy it. So a bond you buy this March would have a 7.12% annual interest rate. And even if the rate is reduced to, say, 6.5% on May 1st, you'll continue to receive the 7.12% rate until September 1st. Then the rate would switch to 6.5% for the next 6 months. By the way, I'm not saying the rate will go down to 6.5%. That was just an example. I don't know what the rate will be. It could be higher than that or lower than that. It will depend on what the CPI-U is at the time, and we'll find out the rate for the May to October purchase period in mid-April. Here's something else that's pretty cool. Even if you buy an I-bond on one of the last days of a given month, you'll be credited with an entire month's interest. So a purchase on, say, March 29th earns all of March's interest. You know, I always like to do a pro and con list if I'm thinking about putting a significant amount of money into something. So let's do that now. First, some of the pros. You'll never lose money on an I-bond. Unlike some bonds that can actually show negative rates, the lowest rate an I-bond holder can receive is 0%, even if the U.S. economy is mired in a long deflationary period. I-bonds are tax deferred. You do have to pay federal taxes on interest you earn, but you don't have to pay until you cash them in. You have control over the timing. You can wait to redeem them when you're in a lower tax bracket, such as during retirement or after a job loss. And there's no state or local taxes on I-bonds. It's easy to set up an account, link a bank, and start buying I-bonds online at treasurydirect.gov. The site also tracks each bond's progress within each account over the months and years and decades. I-bonds also can be part of a college savings plan. Depending on your income level, you might not have to pay federal taxes on an I-bond's interest if it's used to pay college tuition and fees for yourself or a dependent. The Treasury Direct site has more information on that too. Now let's go over a few things about I-bonds that some folks might consider to be cons. There's a limit of $10,000 per person per year. So if you're sitting on 200 grand in cash and thinking you'll get this great 7.12% rate on all of it, think again. There are no joint accounts. So if you and your partner want to max out your annual I-bond buys to a total of $20,000, each of you would need to open and fund an account with $10,000. It's an extra step, but it's really not that much of a hassle. You can't hold I-bonds in an IRA or in any other tax-deferred account. You must hold an I-bond for at least a year. So while the bonds can be viewed as a place to park cash, they aren't a super short-term vehicle. If you'll need the dough in a few months, sorry, but you're going to have to stick with a low-rate bank account. You'll be penalized the last 3 months of interest if you redeem an I-bond after 1 year, but before you've held it for 5 years. That 3-month penalty might sound severe, but it's really not that bad. For example, I recently bought a $10,000 I-bond. For the sake of keeping it simple, let's say the rate renews at 7.12% this spring. So I'll earn that rate for 12 months. But interest is added monthly and compounded semi-annually. So the bond will be worth about $10,725 after 1 year. If I redeemed it then, I'd be penalized the last 3 months of interest, about $183. So my $10,000 investment will have grown into $10,542. That's still an annual rate of 5.35%, far better than any savings account, certificate of deposit, or other safe investment out there. One more thing that some might view as a con, but I view simply as a fact: the current rate will not be around forever and might not be around for all that long. The current I-bond inflation rate of 7.12% annually, or 3.56% on a 6-month basis, is at its highest since I-bonds debuted in 1998. And it's more than double the next highest rate over the last several years, when inflation has been tame. With inflation now being seen as the biggest threat to the U.S. economy, the Federal Reserve is expected to raise its key interest rate at least 3 times in 2022. If that and other moves by the Fed succeed at reducing inflation, the I-bond interest rate also will go lower. Back on May 1st, 2016, the I-bond inflation rate was actually only 0.08%, and I-bonds paid out only 0.18% interest over the following 6-month stretch. That could happen again eventually. Now let's look to the horizon, past the short term. I-bonds continue to accrue and compound interest for 30 years, so they're also a solid way to safely build inflation-protected, cash-deferred savings for the long term. As an example, here's my own personal real money experience. On October 30th, 2003, I bought a $5,000 I-bond after reading that it would be a good, safe way to earn more interest than the prevailing bank rates at the time. Back then, the I-bond fixed rate was 1.1%. The combined annual rate, including the variable inflation rate, was 4.66%. Today, that bond is worth $9,100. Even though I bought the bond on October 30th, the issue date is listed as October 1st, 2003. As I said earlier, regardless of when in a month an I-bond is purchased, you get the full month's interest. In growing from $5,000 to $9,100, my gain over these last 18 plus years has been 82%. Had I invested the money in an S&P 500 index fund, its total return would have been about 500%. But that's comparing apples to orangutans. I wanted something completely safe to help balance out a stock-heavy portfolio, not a risky investment to compete with an index. I mean, we just as easily could compare how I-bonds have fared these last 18 plus years to stocks like PG&E, General Electric, and American International Group. So sure, this bond didn't make me rich, but at least it isn't worth significantly less now than what I paid for it, as a 2003 investment in GE would have been. Gaining 82% with a completely safe investment is pretty darn good, especially considering how low inflation was most of the time I've held my bond. It's why I'm not overly concerned with how new Fed policy could affect future returns. Unless I redeem it, my $5,000 I-bond will keep accruing and compounding interest until 2033. Its fixed rate hasn't changed from the original 1.1%, and it never will. Its composite rate for the current 6-month period, meanwhile, is a beautiful 8.26%. And of course, if I do redeem that bond, there won't be any penalty because I've held it for far longer than 5 years. There are numerous strategies about when to buy and redeem I-bonds to maximize their return. You could buy one near the end of February and then cash it in on February 1st, 2023. Even though you technically would have owned it only 11 months and a few days, that would count as a full year for redemption purposes. If you're using an I-bond as a short-term investment, buying as soon as you can makes sense, because that means you'll be able to cash out earlier. If you're using it as a long-term investment, the start date isn't as important. You could wait until mid-April to hear what the rate for the next 6 months will be, and see whether your current rate or the future rate is better. If the future rate is higher than 7.12%, you could put off the purchase until May. It can take a few days for an I-bond purchase to go through, especially if you're setting up an account for the first time. So if you want to own a bond by, say, April 30th, you should initiate the process by April 26th or 27th. If you get a tax refund, it's also possible to use it to buy up to $5,000 in paper I-bonds. You'll need to fill out IRS Form 8888 and include it when filing your tax return. Remember, $10,000 is simply the annual limit. You can buy as little as $25 in a year. You also can build your I-bond investment week by week, $25 or $50 at a time, because maybe that's all the money you have available at a given time. Since the 7.12% rate took effect last November 1st, my wife and I have bought 3 $10,000 I-bonds. We each bought one in December, and I made my 2022 investment in early January. We might wait to see what the May rate change will be before my wife spends her $10,000 for 2022. Regardless, we'll absolutely buy $20,000 worth of I-bonds this year, just as we did in 2021. There aren't many no-brainers in the investing universe, so we're not about to miss out on this one. Okay guys, that's all for today. Again, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our content. Take it easy everybody. Back at you soon.